For this meeting. Matt Marshall ended up just getting a work call, so he probably won't be joining us. That happens this time of day. Were you able to open up the materials that we just sent forth that support the agenda? It was basically an updated agenda that with a couple pieces of information related to the titles.
I got it.
Okay. Were you able to see that, Linda? Did it come through in enough time? And Matt, were you able to? Or you're looking for it now?
Can Matt hear us?
I think he has a picture of himself. Now we have two of him. You might be having a little glitch going on. Oh, there you are. Matt, were you able to get the updated agenda with the title material about the federal funds?
I believe so. Yeah, I was running the antivirus and clicked update, and then it cut me off the internet. So
That happens. Well, we'll talk through it. I just wanted to make sure you had an opportunity to have it in front of you as well. If you need me to present it, I can do that.
no, I'm good. I got it here.
Okay. So for anyone watching, I'll also talk through this, but every year our district qualifies for federal funds. And the ones we qualify are Title 1, 2, 4, and 5. And the rate that how the amount of money we're allocated is entirely dependent upon our free and reduced lunch rate. So every year the allocation changes. So I thought the first step we'll do is just refresh our memory on how we agreed to use the federal funds for this past school year. These are not only agreed upon at the local level. Before I use the information to then complete an application with the State Department of Education. And then a team at the Department of Education has to approve the use of those funds. And then we go through a whole process all year. So Title I is we focus on our homeless population, which is mostly locally funded in our district, but some funds come from Title I. And we focus on our math and literacy supplemental instruction, which supports students kind of at risk or struggling with learning. So we used our funds mostly, we use them every year for salaries and benefits for the interventionists. So the people who provide those supplemental supports for students who qualify. We use funds for the Family Engagement Reserve. So that's for special events and activities that help families develop skills to support their learners at home. This year we used some of our funds because Helen Thompson no longer qualifies for Title I. We were kind of caught off guard by that because the free and reduced lunch rate changed so drastically, so quickly that they don't qualify. That we reallocated some of those funds this year only for the district management group work that helps us redesign our intervention system around equitable and inclusive schools. We shared those costs with special education. We also bought some comprehension kits through Fontes and Pinnell for grades 3 through 5 because we found that was an area of need based on our data, and we needed some resources to better support them. And we had a small allotment of money to support accessing learning for students who are homeless. Most of the funds that we use for our homeless population, again, are locally funded. For Title II, that's teacher quality, teacher professional development, and principal quality. So, and reducing class size. You can't use all your funds just to reduce class size everywhere. You have to kind of balance your funds. And we try to look strategically across the district of how we can, like if we have a bubble year, how we can use these funds strategically to support that, because it's kind of an unexpected cost. It shouldn't be supplanting our regular ongoing budget. It should be one of those kind of unexpected, unusual costs. So we reduced the class size at Helen Thompson in grade 3. We worked on some professional learning focused on math practices and some internal and external professional development funds for more literacy work, numeracy work, and response to intervention. And mostly the literacy work was at the K1 level with our Jolly Phonics training. We transfer all of Title IV out. There's lots of rules to Title IV, and we don't get enough. You have to separate your money into buckets equally, and we really don't get enough money to separate them into the number of categories that we have to for Title IV to follow all the rules. So you're allowed to transfer funds. So we transfer our funds to Title V. That's the Rural Education Fund, and it's a flexible fund. And that allows Title V to have more funds in it, and we use that to pay for our math interventionists at Helen Thompson School because they don't qualify for Title I, so we can still use some federal funds to support that intervention program. We don't have to pay for it all locally. And this year, we also use some of those funds for a project at the high school to support thinking about how to develop a more robust research program across content areas, so across science, social studies, and English. It got a little bit delayed with everything going on this year, but we did do some great work on developing common expectations for research and finding tools and resources to support that. And our next step is to develop some assessment practices. So that's how we used all of our funds this past year. It's really important that we're always transparent in the use of our funds, just like we are with our local money. So I make sure this information is shared with this committee, with the board, with parent groups. And then in anticipation of the coming year, I posted something on the website called the public comment. And I share how we think we're going to use the funds, what the fund allocation is. And I leave it open for a period of time for people to call or email me. And I directly email our Title I families where we have email addresses to let them know this is happening in case they want to weigh in, since they have direct experience with our intervention system. At this point, I don't have any feedback from our Title I families. We also usually spend a lot of time in the spring looking at our assessment data as a leadership team, and then building by building, determining what we need to adjust in our 5-year plan for supporting learners, and then trying to align the use of some of these federal funds to that. This particular year, we're a little bit stuck because we didn't have spring assessment data. We didn't feel like we were prepared to have some of those assessments running virtually in students' homes, given the conditions we were all experiencing. This is just like pretty much every other school in the state of Maine. So we have some winter data that we're going to try to use to look at ongoing trends. And we have some family engagement data that we'll use for our reports that are due at the end of the summer. But it's not a ton of new information to inform how we should use next year's funds. So we're trying to rely on what we've gathered from the remote learning experience and what we've gathered from the winter assessment data to see if we're still on track with what we want to do next year. Do you have any questions about how that works? One of the things you've brought up as a team is the allocation of funds and how that is determined by our free and reduced lunch rate. And we have a lot of minutes from different curriculum committee meetings about this. So I thought maybe before we kind of go into what next year will look like, I should provide you a quick update of our status with our free and reduced lunch rate. And I'm going to just provide you a quick one as it compares to the fall, actually. So our allocation is usually determined based on October 1 data. That gives us enough, because every year people have to reapply. And so that gives us enough time to work with families to try to get them into the system if they need help and want to be able to access the free and reduced lunch rate. But we still track this data every single month. So I have the data from May 1st as it compares to October 1st of this last year. So the same school year, in the same school year. And May 1st, remember, was like already 6 to 8 weeks into this pandemic response, where I thought maybe some of our numbers would go up because people might want to be accessing that, even though we were ensuring families that they would have access to the food services no matter what, right? We were still creating space for people to fill out these applications if they needed to. So at the high school, we are down to 30%, which is 4% lower than the fall. At the middle school, we are down to 41%, which is 2% lower than the fall. At Helen Thompson, we are down to 29%, which is 3% lower than the fall. And to be clear, to qualify for Title I, you really need to hit the 40% threshold year over year. You're allowed to have an off year, and then you can be grandfathered for one more year. So Helen Thompson basically went through 3 years under 40%, which is why they no longer qualify. At Laura E. Richards School, they're up 4%. So they're up to 46%. At the Pittston Randolph School, they dropped 2%, down to 42%. And at Riverview, there was no change. They remained stable at 47%. It then gives us a district average, and that's like the first cut is the district average, and then they look at the school based. So at the district average, in the October 1st, our district average was 39%. So we're just below that 40% mark. And we're what is called the targeted Title I school district. So we provide kind of like pull out intervention services for certain students who meet certain criteria. And they meet with their extra supplemental educator once or up to 5 times a week. There's another Title I program called Schoolwide, where everyone in the school would have access to the services. And you set up your system a little differently, and you're able to push your support staff into the classroom. It's a little more seamless, it's a little more inclusive, and some students feel like there's a greater sense of belonging. It's a model we'd like to move towards at some point. The challenge is you really need to hit a 40% threshold in the district. You can get a waiver if you're not quite at 40%, if you're awfully close. Well, in the fall, we were at 39%, but now we're down to 37%. So we're going in the wrong direction, which is fine if it accurately reflects our community, but I'm not actually confident that it accurately reflects our community. So there's two aspects here. One is we really want to make sure that the families who want support and need support know how to get it and can easily access it. And we're trying to work with the systems that are provided to us. And the paperwork can sometimes be overwhelming or frustrating to complete. And there's a lot of privacy that's needing to be involved. So we need to be really, really cautious about who speaks with families. And then on the other hand, when we don't have that paperwork filled out and families aren't able to pay, we're assuming those costs because these young people need their meals. It's important. And it impacts our access to federal dollars that supports these programs. So it's just a tricky situation. And so I'm just trying to share where we're at, that at a time when I thought we might be going up in our free and reduced lunch rate, we're actually going down. I don't know what there is to do about that, but just to be aware that that's our current situation. So what that means is last year, I have it here. Last year, we experienced a reduction of about $24,000 in across all of our title funds. And this year we experienced another reduction this coming year of $18,862.03. So we're getting close to a $40,000 reduction across 2 years, which is a pretty significant impact on our service model. So it's just what we're trying to do is trim and be really mindful so that it's not heavily impacting our local budget. Any questions on that? Mr. Lothridge?
I have a question. We have a town website in Pittston. Is it possible to get you to write a letter explaining this? I don't want to write it because I don't want people, I don't mind taking a call, but I don't, particularly for this, the confidentiality of it, I'd like to have something we could put in onto the website that says what we're losing and what we could gain if we can get more people to participate that are qualified in the town of Pittston. And I think everybody could do that. In every town.
There is a letter that's now posted on our website, and I can send you the direct link. It's also linked into this agenda if you scroll down, but your agenda is a PDF, and sometimes those links don't always work in PDFs. So I can send you the direct link, the whole group, the direct link after the meeting. And what it says exactly what you're saying, Mr. Lothridge, like, but it would probably be helpful to have your eyes on it, because what seems like it's summarized information from my perspective might not feel clear from your perspective. And so I would welcome feedback on that document, and I could adjust it for use in other spaces.
Okay, super.
Because it is public knowledge, it's okay for, I mean, this is what we
Yes.
want our communities to understand how we're using
I
these.
just thought if we could put it out in some fashion that told what we are benefiting by filling this out and what we possibly are losing, and get it out to maybe even out to the grandparent. This way, if we go to all citizens, we go to the grandparents, and that maybe they will know that, maybe I can get my daughter or son to make sure this gets done for the grandkids and for their own kids.
Yeah, I mean, because first and foremost, we want to make sure if families need these supports, that these programs, the food service program offers, that we get that to them first. Like, that's critical. The secondary element is that because that is there's a very specific process that's followed, it's how they then determine how these other federal dollars gets employed in our shared across the state. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we'll make sure that link is more easily accessible for you to take a look at and let me know what you think. So in knowing that we were, down a little bit of money, we tried to think through how we might use this coming school year's funds. You'll see a lot of it is fairly similar, but there isn't really any fluff at all. So, and that's okay. As long as the services to the students remain, that's really what's most critical to me. So with Title I funds, the 3 requirements for the use of Title I funds are the only use of the funds for this coming year. So as so far at this stage, we anticipate using the Title I funds for the salaries and benefits of our interventionists at LER, Riverview, and Pittston Randolph, because Helen Thompson doesn't qualify. We still need to have comparable services. That's a requirement. If you use federal funds for this type of program, you have to be able to provide a comparable service at your other school, which we do through different funds. We have to use a little bit of the money coming from Title I for the family engagement work, which is important, right? If we're going to help our students, then we need to make sure we help them use those skills at home. and then a portion of the funds to support homeless students and access to learning. Those are the 3 critical requirements that come from Title I, and we are following suit. But there's no, like last year we used the money for some other projects as well, and we don't anticipate that at this point in time. If that changes, I'll make sure that becomes public. For Title II, that's the teacher quality and principal quality grant. We will use some of the funds for a class size reduction, just like we have in the past, but for a different location. Professional learning focused on remote and in-person integration of math content and practices at the 6-8 level, grades 6 through 8. So our data suggests that we need to focus in there, since we have a K-5 math coach in play right now. I know there's been a position approved for another math coach, but we're waiting. We're going through a process on that. And then a very small amount of funds set aside to try to support our teachers by building up some teacher leadership opportunities in there around pedagogy and instruction. And I think that's all. That's all I have for Title II. Title IV funds, that's the one with all the categories that you have to put your funds into, and we don't receive a lot of funds there. So we transfer those funds out into more flexible accounts. And this year we anticipate transferring some into Title I to try to make sure we cover those salaries and benefits, because that's where our biggest loss was this year. And transfer some into Title V. That's our flexible fund. By doing that, when we go to Title V, the Rural Education Fund, that's where we can then use those collected funds towards the salary and benefits of a math interventionist at Helen Thompson School. That way, the local dollars are only paying for the literacy interventionist at that school, which we started paying for last year. It was built into last year's budget. And so by having it in this year's budget, we're not changing the budget. We're not increasing the budget. We've had to assume those costs in order to have that program and support services for students. Those are where our dollars are. So there aren't really any projects identified this coming year at this point in time, because we really need to keep the funds closest to the students by providing those salaries and benefits for those intervention programs. Are there any questions on how that's used or how you think it could be used differently? Again, I'm always seeking public comments, so if there's anyone watching, you can email me at ahardy@msad11.org with your thoughts on this or your questions. Board members, anytime you can, reach out, or we can bring it back to a committee meeting. I am hoping through the email that I sent out to our Title I families, that if there's any feedback that they can offer it by July 15th, so that we can use that data to really inform our application. So I won't be filling out an application until a window of time has gone for the public to comment. And then we still have to go and apply for these funds that are set aside for this district and receive approval, which doesn't usually come until mid-August. And then we can start using them for the next school year. The only difference this year is that the budget process is also happening around the same time. Usually we've already resolved that. Do you have any questions on how we use our federal funds, or why we spend so much time in these committee meetings focusing on it? What I'd really like to be able to do is, after we get the school year started, and have a better sense of how we're learning next year. If we do have some assessment data, really looking at that and understanding the implications for this change of learning on our student assessment data, and how hopefully these service models will really be integral to growing our learners and keeping us or keeping all of our learners kind of on track to succeed in the next year, in the next 2 years, so that we feel like every one of our kids is getting what they need, even though we've gone through this unusual period of time. That's all I have. Is our focus was because we've done so much of the work around curriculum, our focus has really just been on making sure that we were really clear and transparent about how these federal funds are used and what the implication is on our local budget, which right now is no changes in our local budget. We were able to make adjustments even though we had a reduction in funds at the federal level. Is that adequate wait time? Okay. We will be able to conclude this meeting early today, and hopefully that will give you a little bit of time before the budget hearing tonight that happens at 6 p.m. So if you're tuning in and you'd like to learn about the local budget rather than the federal budget, feel free to join the meeting at 6 p.m. Right, Becky? Right. She says right.
Right. Sorry. I always
Great.
lose the mute button.
I know. Well, thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me and to listen about the federal funds. It seems like maybe you don't have a lot of questions because we've done such a good job going over this in the years, over the last couple of years.
I want to thank you. I learned a lot of this. This is my first go round with one of these, and I'm very happy with what you are presenting. So thanks a lot, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Oh, wow. Thank you. And I will follow up with everyone with that link to what's on our website. And any feedback you have about the presentation of that, it's one of those tricky, a lot of information that you're trying to streamline. So if you have any feedback, I'd love to gather that.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon. I'll see you soon.